Hello people, you're welcome to Freak. In this video, I'll be showing you how to sew a mermaid skirt. This is actually part of a bridal dress. The tutorial is very loaded. If you have always wanted to learn hip padding, you're going to learn it from this video. If you haven't watched the pattern drafting tutorial for this, you can click on the link in the description box. It will be there, but then we still did a little bit of some contouring here and there, transfer the pattern to fabric, and then the entire sewing process. If this looks like what you're interested in, let's go ahead. But before I continue, don't forget to like this video, share it, and drop a comment in the comment section. Thank you. Let's do this. This is my straight skirt pattern, which is my basic skirt extended to the floor. That's a floor length straight skirt, and here I'm using my marker to highlight my lines and curves so that it is more visible to you. Right here is the back pattern, and I'm highlighting my zipper allowance, which is just 1 inch wide. Here we go with the hem. Here is the nail line. The only difference between this pattern and the one I used in my previous tutorial is that I went in on the nail line by 3 inches instead of the regular 2 inches I will usually work with. Now let's go ahead with a little bit of contouring here and there. So this is the front skirt pattern. At the center front of the waistline, I am moving downward by 1/2 inch, and at the side of the waistline, I am going upward by 1/2 inch. What I'm doing will help this waistline sit better on the waist. Having done that, I'll go ahead to measure this curve just to be sure that I still have my waistline divided by 4 accurately. Then I'll be blending it into the rest of the curve. Another alteration I'll be making on this pattern is on the hip line. Because I intend to add a hip part to this, I am adding a 1 inch allowance for that. So I'm going to be blending that into the rest of the curve. I will be altering the back pattern a little bit more. Just like I did for the front pattern, I'll be moving upward by 1/2 inch at the side. At the center back, I will move downward by 1 inch. Initially, I made it 1/2 inch, but I ended up correcting that. And just like I did for the front, I measured my waistline again. Then along the hip, I am adjusting the hip line, adding additional 1/2 inch for the hip pad. At the center back, I will move inward by 0.75 inch, and this is just to allow my zipper sit into the waistline properly. Next, on the knee line, I will move inward by 1 inch. That way, I'm trying to reshape my butt. So I connected the waistline to the hip line like so, and now I'm connecting the hip line to the new nail line. You know, normally I will replace all the inches I took off the center back at the side to make up for that deficit. But in this case, because I am making this for a corset, we know how deeply a corset can sit at the center back. I won't be doing any replacement at the waistline, but on the knee line, I will be replacing the 1 inch I took out at the side like so. That's done. I can go ahead to join all my dots together to create the side curve for this back pattern. With this altered pattern, what it means is that our zipper allowance is equally altered to follow the new lines and curves. Moving on, let's create a pattern for the hip pad. I need you to take a measurement from your back waistline to underneath your butt. For me, that was about 15 inches and about 7 inches from my nail line. And here I am marking that line. So this will help us know where our hip pad should stop, okay? So I'm doing the same thing for the front pattern as well. I'll be marking a midpoint between the hip line and this our underbutt line. Let's call it an underbutt line. So I'm just going to draw it there. I'm using dotted line so that I just remember that it's just a guide, sort of. On the waistline, come downward by 3 inches. That will mark the beginning of our hip pad. Okay, now I need you to create a curve from the point you just marked towards the center back. I am making mine just half an inch away from the zipper line right there. Towards the 3 inches mark, make sure that your curve isn't deep. Okay, just make it very curvy, not slanted, like so. And then I marked about 1 inch from my imaginary line, just a guide, guys, nothing serious. So I'm marking it, and then I'll be connecting this curve right there, and from that point I can make the rest of my curve kind of deep, okay, more slanted. Let's just say I'm making a very slight S shape at the bottom of my hip pad pattern right there. So once I was satisfied, I went ahead with my marker pen to highlight this so that you guys can see it properly. For the front pattern of the hip pad, I'll be measuring my hip line and dividing it into 2 as a guide. Having done that, I went to the side of the pattern. I am taking 3 inches downward, the same place I marked for the back pattern. So I'll be connecting this to my dot on the hip line and connecting it to my underbutt line using a curve. You will notice that the curve I am making for the front pattern is more gentle than what I had at the back. Because we are making a mermaid skirt, I'm going to be extending the length of my skirt by 10 inches. But this is highly subjective, so you may not need to go that far. 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches may be okay for you, and you can even go further if you want. Now here is our pattern sitting pretty. So I'll go ahead now to cut this out so that we can do our slash and spread, transfer the pattern to fabric, then move on to sewing. Here is our skirt pattern, the front and the back. Now you can decide to slash and spread on your fabric, but for the purpose of this tutorial and how it should be done professionally, I'm going to be slashing and spreading on a brown paper. Locate the center of your knee line and square it downward. Go ahead and slash the line you just created. When you get to your knee line, take a bend towards the side of your pattern and slash. Don't slash it through. Leave about half of an inch or 1/8 of an inch towards the edge. Here I'll be pinning down my pattern so that I can spread the side. Because the center front will be on fold when you're transferring to fabric, you can't spread the center front. So you just spread towards the side. I am spreading by 4 inches, but it is subjective, so you can go ahead and spread wider. Recall that in the pattern drafting tutorial, I actually spread about 10 or 12 inches, but for the fit I am aiming for this pattern, I just did 4 inches. So go ahead and measure your new slanted line. Because of that spread at the knee line, it has extended by about half an inch thereabout. So now I'm just adjusting the center front to meet up with the side now. So this will help give my pattern a rounded hemline along the front. I'll be doing the same thing for the back, so you are going to have the same rounded hemline at the back as well. Having done this, that is all you need for the front pattern. I'll go ahead and cut out my paper, and we'll be transferring this pattern to fabric. Here is the fabric I'll be using. First, I'll put it on fold, then go ahead to place my paper on it. I am adding a 1 inch side seam allowance here, even though I had to readjust this. But for now, what I'm doing is adding a 1 inch side allowance, but then half an inch along the waistline and half an inch along the hem. That's because the method of finishing I'll be using just requires that. To ensure that I have a smooth sewing session, I'm going ahead to notch the top and bottom of my hip pad and also the hip line. This will guide me and save me some headache. The next thing I'll be doing is to cut this pattern into two along the nail line, because I need a pattern for my lining, and the lining I'll be using for this skirt is just a nail length lining. So ensure you do this before cutting out the pattern for the hip pad. Once I have the pattern for my lining, I'll go ahead and transfer this to fabric, making sure that the center front is on fold. Then I have 1/2 inch at the nail line and at the waistline and 1 inch along the side. For the back pattern, I'll be doing almost the same thing I did initially before we move a step forward. Divide the nail line into two and square it downward. Go ahead and slash, and then you spread towards the side, not towards the center back, towards the side. Then I will also be spreading this by 4 inches, the same thing I did for the front. Now, this is where we'll be using arcing technique. I am not doing my arcing technique on the paper this time. I am doing that directly on the fabric. Before you go ahead to do the marking and the cutting, ensure that the length you folded is longer than the length you have at the center back. That is because you want your gordette to be longer than the regular center back. This is very, very important. For this particular one I am making, it is 8 inches longer than the length along the zipper line. Now, this is very subjective, so go ahead and make your gordette as long or as wide as you want it to be. For me, I'm not working with a very long gordette. I don't want it to be too elaborate. I hope you read the text earlier on. I mistakenly flipped this pattern the other way. Okay, I should be measuring the center back, but here I am measuring the side. Okay, that will be corrected later on. So here I drew a line to extend the nail line on the pattern onto the fabric, just like I am doing right here. And then I did the same thing for the hemline as well. Now I'm going to draw a straight line from the extended nail line to the extended hemline, and we'll go ahead to make the corner there curvy so that you don't have sharpness. I'm cutting out my fabric here, and I'm adding 1/2 inch allowance, which wasn't necessary, by the way. Just that was me still working with my side rather than the center back. It was at this point I realized what had happened, and I was just praying and hoping that I hadn't messed up my fabric. Thankfully, I just flipped this over, and now I can cut my gordette along the center back rather than the side. Okay, yes, this is the proper way to do it. Now I went ahead to add 1/2 inch side seam allowance instead of 1 inch that I originally planned, because I couldn't afford that because of my error. Then we have 1/2 inch along the waistline and 1/2 inch along the hemline. I went ahead to also notch the top and bottom of my hip pad pattern and also the hip line, and this is what I am working with. It looks pretty. Just like I did for the front pattern, I am separating this pattern into two from the nail line so I can have a pattern for my lining. So I went ahead to transfer this new pattern to fabric, and I added 1/2 inch. Note that I was using 1 inch side seam allowance, but now everything is now 1/2 inch. So I added 1/2 inch along the side, 1/2 inch at the nail line, and also on the waistline. Don't forget to also notch your lining both for the front and for the back. Now that I have my lining sorted, I can go ahead to cut out the pattern for the hip pad. Don't forget to label the hip pad pattern, like indicate the direction, the top, the bottom, the center, back, center, front, side, front, so that you don't mix it up. This is very important. For this particular outfit, I will be trying out the use of fiber for hip padding. In the past, I have made use of foam. So if you're making use of foam and you added just half an inch allowance for your hip pad on the pattern, go ahead and cut out from your half an inch thick foam. In this case, I made use of slightly above half an inch thick fiber. That is because fiber has so much air space in it, and I will also be doing a bit of pressing for this. I pinned down my pattern and I proceeded to cut. I added half an inch seam allowance on the side. Now you can do away with this if you will not be sewing the two together, because you can actually exclude this. So I also went ahead to cut out the other part, that's the curvy part of the pattern, but this time without any seam allowance. I did the same thing for the front pattern of my hip pad. It is quite easy to mismatch your hip pad, so make sure that you notch the hip line and also indicate the sides, okay, front, back, and the direction of your hip pad. Now I will be pressing in fusible interfacing. For this I am using cloth stay. You can also make use of air stay. I pressed in my cloth stay and went ahead to cut it out. You see why I said your fiber should be slightly thicker than half an inch, because in the process of pressing you will lose some air. Even with that, you still need to be cautious. Don't press too hard on your fiber. Now go ahead and take out some beads from the curvy side of the hip pad. This is to help it blend into the body. You can kind of shave it. Don't completely cut, just shave the top to make it less obvious, so that it can blend into the body and there won't be any sharp look on the outside of your dress when you're done. So after doing this, I still went ahead to press on the curvy side because it helped flatten the curve some more. I will just be repeating the same process on the other hip pad. Here are the pieces I'll be working with. Now the first step is to go ahead and sew these two together by the same allowance, half an inch, right? So if you didn't add that same allowance on your fiber, what you will do is just sew your cloth stay or air stay together along the side, making sure that the two hip pads are very close to each other, no opening at all. Now I am done joining my two pads together, and I'll be cutting off the same allowance to the barest minimum so that I don't have any bulk on that side. This is what I have for this. I'll go ahead and repeat the process for the second one. Now here is the lining for the back, and I have the lining for the front in my hands. I'll go ahead and sew these two lining together along the side, leaving open the center back. So I am sewing by our seam allowance, which is half an inch. Having done that, I'm going to be attaching the hip pad to the sides of the lining. Note the direction of the hip pad. Now if you have notched on your lining and on the hip pad, this should be easy peasy. Make use of your pins. Pin down the notch you have on the lining to the notch you have on your hip pad. This will just help with alignment immediately. Then you go ahead and continue pinning round your hip pad, making sure that you don't have any fabric bulk inside. Just make sure your fabric lays flat on the hip pad. Now what I did was to pin down the center from top to the bottom. Then I went ahead to just straighten out my fabric so I could pin along the side of the hip pad. That way everything sat into themselves properly. You can decide to tack the hip pads on the lining along the sides of the parts like so, or you go ahead to sew on the sewing machine. I went for the latter. Sewing the rest of the skirt is quite easy. First, I marked 10 inches on the zipper allowance, and that is the space I'm leaving out so that I can fix in my zipper. I will be joining the two side pieces together from that point downward by 1 inch because our zipper allowance is 1 inch wide. I'll be making the junction between the nail line and my gordets curvy rather than sharp. After sewing the seam all the way down, don't forget to notch that junction so that it relaxes properly. Now I will go ahead to attach my zipper. This is the result right here. Next, I'll be going ahead to sew the front and back piece together towards the side by my 1/2 inch side seam allowance. Note that because we took in 0.75 on the side of the back pattern without replacing it, you have a deficit there, but don't worry, just go ahead and use your 1/2 inch seam allowance. Nothing more, nothing less. Every other part should sit into each other perfectly. Now I'm going to place my lining over this skirt, wrong side facing the wrong side. Okay, so we are going to use this lining to finish up the zipper allowance. I am closing it up in such a way that the same allowance is inside between the lining and the main fabric. That way the hip pad will be between the fashion fabric and the lining. Now this is what we have here, our skirt looking gorgeous. You can make it into a skirt if you have a blouse you are pairing it with, but right now it is underneath the corset, but we are going to put it over the corset and make this two into a dress. So if you want to understand fabric placement, then you should watch the next video because I'll be layering a lace over the plain skirt below. I love how this nail region looks so put together. You don't want your nail, depending on the style you're going for anyways, but I really wanted the one that the nail will sit into the body. I'll make sure that I have this on a human model, probably myself, and use it as a thumbnail of this video later on, so you can come back to check the thumbnail when it is updated. So I also love how the mermaid part of this skirt spreads so well. You can spread the front pattern a little bit to create more fullness at the front, and you can also extend the gordette way longer than this, just as you wish. If you watched this far, then that means you got some value from this video. Please drop a comment in the comment section and let me know what you learned. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to share it to other sew stars. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.